In this session, I'm going to talk about some of the basic database concepts. First, we're going to start with the definition of a database. A database is a collection of data that is stored in a computer system. A database allows their users to enter, access and update, and analyze their data quickly and easily. They are a powerful tool that you see them all the time. When you go to the doctor's office, when you go to the grocery store, when you go online to purchase something, when you go to search something on a library system, all that information is usually stored in what's called a database. The easiest way to understand a database is to think of it as a collection of lists. So think of it, for example, if you're running a business, you have a list of customers, you have a list of orders from those customers, you have a list of items that you are selling to your customers or services that you are providing to your customers, and then you might have a list of invoices and other purchases from vendors and things alike. When you put all of those lists together in a database, those lists are linked together and information is related from one table to another, and that's partially what is referred to as a relational database. So where does Access fit into this? Microsoft Access 2010 is a relational database software program or database management system, DBMS, that runs on Windows operating system. It is used to manage data that is organized into lists, such as information about customers, products, vendors, employees, projects. So basically, again, Microsoft Access is a relational database management system created by Microsoft to store, organize, and manipulate data, as well as to select and report on it. The question is, what are some of the database components? So some of the components, just to summarize them briefly, are tables, queries, forms, and reports. Tables, that's where the data is stored within the database. Then the queries retrieve specific data from the tables or other queries and displays only the data that you specify. Queries allow you to ask questions about the data in your tables. For example, I want just the first name, last name, and email address. It's very similar to the other function in the computer, like the processing that takes place in the computer, if you were to take it as an analogy. Then the form is used to enter new records in a table. That's the data entry component of it. And to edit or delete existing records into the table. Usually the data is not entered directly into the table manually, but it is done through the forms. And the form, think of it the input of the data, the entering of the information into the system. And then the reports are the fourth component here, and those would be very similar to the output. They summarize the fields or records from a table or a query in an easy to read format. For example, that would be a report that you print out, something that you print out to give to your manager for the sales of that day. Now, what does all of this look like in an actual database? Here's a really simple database that we have. We have a database called the customer sales here, and we have a bunch of tables. In this case, we have the customer table, we have the contract table, and then we have invoices. So think again about these as separate lists. So the customer table, of course, it would have the list of customers. We have here for example, the customer ID, company, first name, last name, telephone number, street address, city, state, and so on. So those would be very similar to what we have seen in Excel. You can sort this data, you can manage it in different, filter it, and things of that nature, but think of it just as a list. Now, besides the customers, if you're running a business, then you'd probably have different contracts or different sales. So in this case, this is another example of a table, the contracts table. If we double click on it, we have the contract number, the customer ID, contract amount, the date, and then the type. And then notice we have another table here called invoices. And the invoice table has the date, number, and the item, what it was for, the amount, and whether it was paid or not. So those are the tables. Again, this is where the data is stored into a database. Think of it, when you hear tables, storage. The next component in a database, like I mentioned earlier, it is the queries. So if we go here, the queries, for example, are like we have the table customers. Notice we have a whole bunch of fields here. The fields are those names of the columns here. And let's say that we wanted to generate a list of only the first name, last name, and then let's say email address and some other pieces of information here. So what we do is we create what's called a query, and we'll learn how to create queries momentarily here. So notice I have another entry here under the customer table, and this is a query that we have run that I defined earlier. If I double click on it, notice I have only the first name, last name, telephone number, and email address. So that, think of it, the processing of a data based on a criteria. And this is an example of a form. The form is basically, instead of you going to the customer table, scrolling all the way to the bottom and entering the data manually here, which is not recommended, you'd go under the customer data entry form, for example, in a form similar or nicer than this, and enter the new records right here. And you just basically fill in the data. In real business, this is what the assistant would utilize for entering the data into the database. And then the final component, as I mentioned earlier, it is the reports. And reports are very similar to queries, but they are just designed so that they can be printed out and that they look nicer. So these were some of the basic components of a database. Each database has various components. The tables are where the data is stored. The queries are how the data is manipulated. Then the forms are how the data is updated and added onto. And then the reports, how the data is printed out or output. In this session, I'm going to cover a couple of the basic concepts on working and getting started with Microsoft Access 2010. As soon as you open Access 2010, this is what you'll be presented with. You have the options to use available templates, so you can create a blank database, or you can use some sample databases, for example, predefined ones that have been designed by the program. And also you can go and download from office.com different templates that are provided by Microsoft. In our case here, what we're going to do is we're going to create one from scratch. So we're going to make sure we click on blank database, and then we're going to give it a name. I'm going to name this just using Access. Notice what's different here is that unlike Microsoft Word, or you type a document, or in Excel you type a document or a spreadsheet and then you save it later, here you have to create the database, you save it, and then you enter the records and update it as you go. It's also important to keep in mind that as you enter records and data into the Microsoft Access database, the data is saved automatically. Just tell the system where you want to save it. So I'm going to save it under users here, in my name, and then documents, and it's going to be saved under the name using Access 2010. I click on create, and at this point we have just started with a blank database. Before we actually get started with creating a blank database here, a couple of things as far as the advantages of using Microsoft Access as a database management system. One of the things is that duplicate data is minimized, and then secondly is that information is more accurate, reliable, consistent, because duplicate data is minimized. So in other words, you have one customer with multiple orders, but you don't have the same customer listed multiple times in those lists. Also, data entry is easier and faster using Microsoft Access forms, and then the information can be viewed and sorted in any way that you'd prefer using queries, forms, and reports. Also, information is more secure using Microsoft Access because you can limit access to the database by using passwords and different levels of security. Another thing to keep in mind is that multiple users can use the same database at the same time. So notice here we have a table called table 1, and at this point we can just first define the fields. The fields, if you remember from Microsoft Excel, are those headers on the very top of the row here. So we have the customer ID. We can add the other fields for this table. Now notice we'll click here on click to add, and the first thing that it asks us is that this new field that you want to add, what type of field is it going to be? Is it going to be a text, number, currency, date, or any of those? So what we do here is this is going to be text, for example. So we'll say first name and then just hit enter. Then the next one is going to be last name, and that's going to be also a text field. The next one it's going to be the address, let's say. So we click on text again and then go to the next one, text. Keep in mind that every piece of data would have it in separate fields. So here we'd not put the address all into one field, we'd actually have it as separate, because the nice thing is that we can utilize it later, for example, to filter by only certain customers within a zip code or certain customers within a specific state or city and so on. And then if we're going to put a number here, for example, for telephone number, we just choose it's a number field. Now we are ready to enter the actual data in here in this table. For now, we enter it directly through the table. However, data needs to be entered by using the form, or that's the most commonly used way of entering the data. So at this point, we put here the names of the customers. And I'm just pressing tab to move from one field to the other. A couple other things here to keep in mind with tables is that basically you have the different columns and the different rows very similar to Microsoft Excel that we are used to using. Now, each one of those it's referred to as a cell, very similar to like Microsoft Excel as well. These are the different records. So this is record number 1. And that includes all these pieces of data about this customer. And that will be record number 2. Each table has what's referred to as a primary key. And this is a very important concept. The primary key in a table is a field that is marked as unique, or that makes each record unique within that table. Now notice here under ID, that record has been marked as unique, and that's what differs two customers. So because you could have another customer here, Hubert Sims, and then he could also live at 200 Manor Avenue with all these other pieces of data. However, what makes those two records different is this field here. Notice that the record 1 is different from record 3 because of this unique ID that has been assigned to each customer. So even though all the other pieces of data are different, they still are different because of this primary key. There are actually two ways to enter data into a table, either by the right here like we did so far, or you can use the design view. So this design view is actually the easier one. So let me close this one and we'll save this and we'll call this customers. Again, we are saving at this point. We have created a database from before. And now we are just creating a table within the database. So here's the table customers. Now, if we wanted to go back here, and notice under the Home tab, we have this view and then a drop down. Under view and the drop down, we can choose different views for that specific table. we can click on Design View, and that will give you an opportunity here to change the design or the layout of this table. And this is the preferred way of creating the tables, actually. So notice at this point we have the fields that we defined earlier. Notice when we entered first name, we have a text field. And when we entered the telephone number, that was a number field. Now, if we wanted to add additional fields, we can simply add them right here. For example, we just put the name email. And then we can define what type of field it is, what type of data is going to be in that field. You can have it as text or any of those in here. The email, in this case, it would be text. And then you can also limit the field size, and those would be the field properties here for email. And then you could add additional data, for example, notes. And the notes can be, instead of being just plain text, it could be a memo field, which usually can take up to 64,000 characters. So now that we have this table designed with additional fields, we'll click on Close here. We'll save the design, because you're always, whenever you tinker with the design, you have to save the design of it. However, if you add new records here, you don't have to save them, they are saved automatically. Now, if you remember a moment ago, we added beyond telephone number, we added additional fields such as email and notes, and here they are. So that's how you create a table, and we'll go into the rest of the components in a moment here. Just before we move any further, here a couple of things as far as the application itself, the way it works. I was supposed to actually show you this first, but better late than never. So notice you have the Home tab, you have the ribbon, very similar to Microsoft Word, Excel, and the other applications we have used. Under the Home tab, we have all kinds of common functions here. Some of them are similar, but some of them are very particular to Microsoft Access. Then we have the Create tab, and this is where you'd create and add new components to a database. Think of it very similarly to Microsoft Word and Excel, where you create adding different components like charts in Excel or word art or other objects in Microsoft Word. And then you have also external data. This is where you can bring in or link to other systems out there, like to Excel, other Access databases, other system databases, text files, XML files, and so on. And then under database tools, this is where you can define the relationship between tables or between those lists. And these are the different contextual tools or the tabs that shows up depending on what we are doing, very similar to what we did in Microsoft Word and Excel. Then here on the left, we have this navigation or the datasheet view. This gives us a listing of all the objects within that database, because think of the database with multiple pieces and components to it. Then on the right hand side, this is where we'll see the actual data for that specific table. Sometimes it's best to just close them and you create something new. And that is pretty much to avoid problems and issues that you'll see later. In this session, I'm going to show how you can create a table from scratch. Again, we covered this also earlier, but I'll just go very briefly. And also I'll show you how you can create a table by importing data from a list that you might have in Excel or in a text file, like in a CSV formatted file. So to create a table, if we needed to create a new table here, we'd basically just go under, from the Home tab, we'd go into the Create tab, and then we'd choose Table. Notice it's very similar to what we had before. Now at this point, what I'd recommend is that you go under the drop down here under this view, and then choose Design View. We'll give it a name, and then notice we start with the primary key. This will be the invoice ID. Then we have order number, and so on. So that is the best way to create a table. Now at this point we click on Close, Save Changes, and here we have the invoices table with invoice number, customer number, amount, and so on. So now we want to bring the data from an Excel spreadsheet. So let's say we have this list, the customer list. And instead of us typing all the names of the customers again in Microsoft Access, we want to just simply import this. So here's the list in Excel. Now, how do we bring this into Microsoft Access? It's actually very easy. If we go here under external data, we're going to go and get the data from a different system. In this case, we're going to get the data from Microsoft Excel. So we click on Excel here, and then we go and look where the data is. So that's where I have my data. Here's customer list. And then it's going to say import the source data into a new table in the current database. Or you could append it to an existing table, or you could link it to another data source out there. The easiest and the less problematic one is the first option here, because it's going to create a table based on the fields that exist in the Excel table here. So with all of these fields on the very top. So all we have to do in this case is just click OK. So we selected the file. We selected what we want to do with it. We click OK. And now it's going to ask us how this data is going to look. So we simply click on Next. The first row we say it has the headings. So we want the computer to pick what was in Excel. For example, first name, last name, and so on. Click on Next again. And then it's asking us which one is going to be your list of customers, or the primary key here. Actually, it's asking us to rename those fields if we wanted to adjust the names of these columns. We don't have to do that. And then you can also specify a primary key. So the primary key, you can either have the system create a new one, or we already had different IDs here, and we'll say that customer ID is going to be the primary key. Now you have to make sure that there are no duplicates onto the Excel file, otherwise it's going to error out. So we click on Next, and then we're going to call this Customers. And then we'll click on Finish. Click on Close. Notice we have a new table called Customers. Those two are from before. We actually can delete those to just clear out confusions at this time. Now at this point we have the table called Customers, and if we open it up, notice it has all the customers that we had from Microsoft Excel. So that's one way to bring in the data from another system into Microsoft Access into a table. Now let's go ahead and bring also the invoices. Let's say we kept track of that data as well. Instead of us retyping it, we can simply go into an external system and we pick Microsoft Excel. We go and browse for the file, and now we're going to get the contacts list, for example. So the contact list, we choose the first option to create a new table. We click OK again, and then it asks us that it's going to create a new one. The first row contains the headings, contact number, customer ID, and so on. Press Next. And then here we could get a chance to rename the field names. However, we don't need to. Click on Next, and then you choose the primary key. So we click on Next here, and then we're going to call this Contacts. And then click on Finish. So notice at this point we have two tables. And then we're going to create another table, because supposedly we are running a small business, and you have the customers, you have different contacts with them, and then you also have invoices. Those would be different lists or different tables or different ways that you're categorizing your information. Now, to bring the data, in this case, we are going to actually do this slightly different. Notice different, I have invoices list. The invoices list, and this is an example of what's called a CSV file, or a comma separated values file. So you have, for example, each field and record are separated by commas. Actually, the records themselves are separated by a new line here. So now we want to bring all this data into another table in Microsoft Access. And here the concept is that how do you bring data from a text file or a comma separated file into Microsoft Access. By the way, this is a common format in businesses out there from major large systems. Pretty much any system can create lists and export the data into a CSV file, and then you can import that data into Excel, into Microsoft Access, and so on. So let's go under the external systems, and we're going to choose here text file. Under text file, we are going to pick the file here, and this is the text one, invoices list, and then we'll click on open. At this point, we're going to choose first option to import the data into a new table. That's going to be the easiest. And then it's asking us a couple additional questions here compared to what we were getting before. This is a delimited file, comma delimited or comma separated. So we click on next, and then we know some of them, they could be tab separated, but in this case we know that it's a CSV file or a comma separated, so we choose comma. So notice it separates each item here or each field correctly. And now notice we mark this here as first row contains the field names. Then we click on next. And then similar to what we did earlier, we have the invoice numbered. We can change the names here of these fields on the very top, and we can assign a new primary key, or we can choose an existing key. Then we click on next, and then we are going to call this invoices and click on close. Now notice we have 3 tables. So basically, the concept is that you can have a database with multiple tables, more than one table. You could have hundreds of tables, 10, 50 tables, depending on what you're doing and how large the database is and what functions it's performing. However, with the knowledge that you are getting from this course, you should be able to actually design a basic database. And by the way, that's going to show up in your final exam as well. You should be able to design a basic database and run a small business without having to pay somebody hundreds of dollars to design it for you. So far, to just briefly summarize, we did create 3 tables, and those tables we created, actually the first one we did was from scratch. Then we created new tables by importing the data from different systems by using the external data tab here. We used Excel, but similarly you could use data from another Access database and so on. So now that we have a couple of the tables created by importing the data or by creating the data from scratch, at this point I'm going to talk a little bit about adding data to those tables, formatting them, and then I'm going to get into linking those tables together so that we can perform queries and also run reports and get the data from various tables. For example, one piece, for example, get the customer first name and last name from the customers table, then go and get, for example, the contracts for each customer from the contracts table, and then invoices as well from the invoices table. So in order for us to perform that, we have to link the tables before we can do these queries. So first, we have here the table customers, and to add a new record, even though this is not recommended in a business environment, but if you had to, this is how you add a new record. You go to the very bottom or anywhere here, and notice you can go from one record to the other by clicking on this next icon. You can also go to the very end, the last record, by clicking here, or creating a new record by clicking on this icon here, and then simply type in there. You can search by simply typing a name, and it will bring up wherever that specific name shows up. There are a couple ways to do this differently as well that we'll cover in a little bit. Now, I mentioned earlier, one of the key components here in an Access database is the ability to link those tables together. So in order to link tables and establish a relationship between the various tables, you need to have established first those primary keys and foreign keys. That's where planning comes into play, and it becomes very important. So you have, for example, the customers table. If we go under the Home tab and we click here or right click on the customers table and choose Design View, notice the primary key is Customer ID for the table customers. And if we go, for example, under Contracts, notice if we go under Design View, I'm right clicking here and choosing Design View. We have contract number, that is the primary key. However, notice there is also a customer ID. What that is saying is that when we are recording the contracts, we are not necessarily recording the first name, last name of each customer. We are just putting the customer ID from the customer's table. And that is in the customer's table, the customer ID is the primary key, as we saw a moment ago. Now here, the primary key here, notice this golden key here on the left. For this table, it's a contact number. So the customer ID in this case, it's actually what's referred to as a foreign key. The foreign key is basically a common field between two tables or two lists. In this case, it's a common field, but it's not the primary key on the second table. In other words, you have customers that have contracts, and each customer can have more than one contract. Same idea is for the invoices as well. If we right click and choose Design View here, we have the invoice number, which is the primary key, but then we have the contract number, which is linked to the contracts table. To establish a relationship, this is a very important concept whenever you're designing databases and we are creating more than one table, is that you have to link those tables together. And this is where most of the students fail in their project. One thing before I actually go ahead and link those tables, it's important that whatever data type that the primary key uses on the first table, the same thing needs to be on the foreign key, needs to match. So basically the foreign key here is customer ID needs to be the same data type as the primary key of the corresponding table. So now let's go ahead and link those tables. To link them, you go under Database Tools, and then you click on Relationships. Notice it says Relationships. It defines how the data in tables is related, such as the ID in a field or the name in fields, how they match. So I'm going to pick all the tables. So we just click on each one of those, contracts, customers, and then invoices. We add them all to the board, basically. Now notice we have customers here, and the customers, customer ID, it's the same field under the contracts table. So what we do is we drag the customer ID under customer ID under the contracts table. Now when we drag it, it's a one-to-many relationship. That means that one customer can have many contracts. Now there are ways as well to enforce what's called referential integrity, and I'm not going to confuse you too much with this, but that means basically that if you go ahead and remove a customer for some reason, then it should drop all the contracts as well. In the case of students, if a student has signed up for courses for a semester, however they leave the university, then the system should also drop the courses that they have signed up for. Basically that you update one record or you delete one record, it should delete the other ones to cascade down. For now, for simplicity, I'm going to keep that off. We click on Create, and notice now we have this line. It's telling us that for customer ID here, it's the primary key, and this is the foreign key on the next table. Now, under Invoices, notice the common field here. We don't have here customer ID. So customers is not related to invoices directly. What we have is that from each contract, we generate invoices. So what we do here is we have contract number and contract number. Notice that's the primary key, that's the foreign key here. So what we do is we drag the contract number to contract number down here. So make sure you drag it directly on the name of the foreign key. And then notice it's going to be a one-to-many relationship. So it means it's one contract with many invoices. and then we click on create, and then you can kind of move this either way, however you want to arrange it. And then the key here is to click on close and then save this relationship. Now these tables are linked together. What that means is that if I wanted to pull, for example, the names of the customers, first name, last name, and then the actual contracts, I can do that at this point once the tables have been linked. At this point, let me show you how you can actually create a query. Go under the Create tab, and then we click on the Query Wizard. That's the easiest one. I'd recommend for whatever you do when you're using these databases and you're learning some of the basic concepts, use the wizard component. So click on Query Wizard, and then what you do is choose Simple, and notice we have the table Customers. So the way it works is that you can pick and choose. So you say, I want the first name. You pick the next field, you add it to the right-hand side, and let's say I want just their email. So that's from the customers table. Now let's say I want to go to the contracts table, and let's say I want the contract number, amount, and let's say I want the type. So that's all I want. A query is basically a set of criteria that you want. So now I click on next, and then we click on next again, and then we give it a name. Then I click on finish. And notice the system generated, notice you can actually resize these. The system generated, based on our criteria, created a new list. And this is a query based on those tables. If you remember, each of these tables has only pieces of this information, but it's because they are linked together through that relationship we established earlier and through the primary keys and foreign keys that we can generate a query here with data from two tables. And you can do this with more than two tables if they are linked correctly. How about creating a form where we can enter the data into a table? So to create a form, we simply go under Create, and then we can choose the Form Wizard. So let's say I want from the Customers table, I want to add all of these fields. You can do them all in once by this double arrow here, and then I want to also add the invoices. Let's say I want to add the invoice number, the date, amount, then I click on next again, next, and this is our form. So basically here what we are doing is we are entering, so let me close it first. So once we close it, we save this. And notice we have customers form. There's also a subform for that. That's because we link to a sub table. If we open the customers form, notice we have the customer ID, the name, and also all the invoices for that customer. So for example, Owen here with this address has these invoices. And this is pretty much how most databases work. Now notice we have 39 customers, and you can scroll from one customer to the other by this navigation bar here in the bottom. And also you can create a new customer by clicking on this new record here in the bottom. So when you create a new customer, you can also create a new invoice for them. So that's what's referred to as a compound form. Again, the concept here is that you can create forms once the tables have been linked together. So to create a report, you can again use here the wizard. So the report wizard under create and then report wizard. And then let's say we want customers. Let's say we want customer first name, last name. Then we want to go under the contracts, and then we want to get the amount and the type. So let's say that's all we need for our report. We click on next, next again, next here, and then finish. Under the summary options, you can actually define as well the amount, so you can get a sum of the amount there, or the minimum, maximum, and so on. So if you wanted that, the way I did that was by clicking on summary options here and then choosing just the sum. You can also sort the data by amount, and then we click on next, then next again, and then let's say we wanted customer report. The names here, you'd make them meaningful names so that you, when you see 50 items in there, you'd know what they mean. So we click on finish, and notice we have for Owen here, he has these contracts, and the total comes to 7,750. So you can format these reports to look even nicer than this, but again, notice it looks nicer than the query. The query looked something like this, just state data, and the report, it's designed so it can be printed out with a date and all that type of stuff. Welcome back to Microsoft Access 2010. In this session, I'm going to talk a little bit about database queries. We're going to start with simple queries using the query wizard on particular tables. Then we're going to focus a little bit more into the design view and creating complex queries from multiple tables. Then we are going to sort the data using a query by certain fields within the query selection. Then we're going to modify existing queries, customize them so that we learn how you can reuse the same query and customize only certain fields within it. And then we're going to apply certain criteria. And finally, we're going to create some calculated fields based on selected fields for a query. So the question is, what is a query in a database? Well, a query allows you to select a subset of fields and records from one or more tables and then present the selected data as a single data sheet. So think of it this way. If we have multiple tables here, notice we have the customers table, and that has a bunch of fields here. The fields are those on the top, the columns basically. And then we have another table, for example, contracts, that has additional fields of its own. Now, what we may want at certain times is that we don't care for what company this record belongs to. We might be interested in only having the first name, the last name, and let's say the email address of that, just this data from this table. Then on the contracts table, we might be interested in knowing the amount, the date that they signed up for, and then also the type of contract or what the contract was about. So that's basically what a query is. It's selecting only specific fields that you are interested in from one table or multiple tables. Whenever you go to Wikipedia or whenever you go to Google or a library system and you search for something, you're actually running a query on the database. You're searching for specific fields, especially when you're running an advanced search, you're searching for specific fields within that database. First, we're going to learn how to create a simple query. So let's say we want to go under the customers table, and to create a new query, we go under create here, and then we click on query wizard. Under the query wizard, we can select any of those at this point here, but we'll start with a simple one, and then we'll click OK. So we can choose from one of those tables. Notice that you can actually query within other queries. But for now, we're going to select the table customers. And then from the table customers, let's say we are interested in having only the first name, the last name, and then let's say that we wanted only the email address. By the way, if you use the double arrows here, it will add all those fields on the left to the right-hand side. And if we don't want one of those fields that we added to the right, we can choose to send it back by using the back arrow. And now we'll click on Next, and then we'll give it a name. And then click on Finish. Notice we have only the data that we requested. At this point, we can go ahead and close this query, save it, because that had to do with the design of it. And I'm going to close all these other tables as well. Now we have here customer query by first and last name. If we add a new customer here, somehow in the very end here, we're going to add a new customer. That's customer name. And then we add more data here if we wanted to. Now notice I didn't have to save this. I can close this. That data is already saved automatically. Now if I go and rerun this query, and this is the concept here, is that the data is entered into the tables, and the query, all that the query is doing is just asking for specific fields within that table. So notice when I rerun this, it's going to bring up my name that I had just created. Now you'd say, why is this showing up as just first name under Caselli? If we go back to the table here, and this is where you'd correct the data, notice if I scroll all the way to the bottom, I put my first name under company, so we don't want that there, and we want it under first name and the last name. Once we close it, rerun the query again, notice that it'll show up correctly. So that's a simple query based on one specific table. Now what about if you wanted to run queries on multiple tables? So here's how you do that. To run queries in multiple tables, you need to make sure that those tables are related or linked together. And this we did it in the previous videos, and if you don't understand that part of it, please go back and follow the video again. That is done through the use of primary and foreign keys. So if we click here under relationships, notice that we have the customers table. The customer table is linked. Let me do it this way. It's probably more meaningful. The customer table, this is the primary key. It's linked to the foreign key in the contracts table. Then the contract number, it's linked to the foreign key under the invoices table. The concept here is it's only when the tables are linked correctly through the primary and the foreign keys that you can run a query across multiple tables. And this is what I mean. So if I close this, saving the relationship because I rearranged this layout here, we say yes. If I go back and create a new query here, so I choose the query wizard, choose simple query, and let's say under the table customers, I go and pick the first name, last name. That's the only two pieces of data that I want from the customers table. Now, if I go under the table contracts, I can go and get the contract amount, the date, and the type. And then I go ahead and click on next, give it a name here, and then click on finish. Notice at this point, as soon as I hit enter, I clicked on the query here. It picked the first name, last name, and pretty much the fields that I had requested. If I go ahead and close this, go back here and double click on it, notice that's the right one here, and I have the data that I want. So that's how you run a query using the query wizard. If I wanted to modify this query that I have created already, what you can do is, and we'll learn this in the next video here, you can go under the View tab and then choose Design View. And that's where you can modify further things as far as the query if you don't want the field. And I'll cover this in the next video, using the Design View for queries. In this session, I'm going to talk about item 2 here, using complex queries by utilizing the design view in Microsoft Access databases. So let's go back here to Access. Earlier we did simple queries using the query wizard through one table and multiple tables. So now let's say we have 3 tables here. We have the customers table, we have the contacts, and the invoices table. Now, if we wanted to create a query here, we go under create and we're going to use a query design. The query design, notice it's kind of slightly different from the wizard that we learned earlier. We click on it, and now at this point it's asking us what tables we want to utilize for this query. So let's say we wanted the table called customers and then the table called contracts. And then we'll click close. We can choose invoices as well if we want it, but at this point we don't need it. I'll click OK. Now notice it shows us the relation between those two tables, and also it shows the fields. Now what happens is that, notice in the bottom here, we have this area where we can actually add the different fields. Now if you double click on this star here on the top left, that means it's going to add all the fields of that table. It's going to execute a query for all the fields. And by the way, this is more visual and this is more useful, and this is what you'll use most of the time if you're designing new queries in business or for personal use and so on. So in this case, we are going to click on or double click here on first name. So let's say we want the first name in our query. Notice I'm double clicking on it, and then last name. And let's say I want the telephone number and then the email address. Let's say also I wanted the contract type. Notice I'm picking this from another table, and that's because they are linked together from earlier. Let's say I want to see what the results will be. Now what I can do is you can click here on this icon, the run icon, or you could save it and then double click on the saved query here. But for now we are just going to run it to see how it works and whether it works. So we'll click on run, and notice it has posted the data that we requested in that query. Now if we want to go back and modify it again and add another field, what we do is we go under the view here, we're in the home tab, and then the drop down here under view, and then we'll choose design view. Under design view, then we can pick something else like one of those other fields, or if we don't want one of those fields, we could simply delete it from here by pressing delete, selecting the field and pressing delete. And then if we rerun it, notice that field is now no longer going to be executed or included in the query. Now let's go back here and go to the design view, and we're going to add, for example, the amount and the date and then the contract type. And notice at this point we have 2, 4, 6, 7 fields that we have selected. If we go and run it to test it, we go ahead and click on run, and there is our data. If we are happy with this query, what we do is we click on close here on the top right, and then it will ask us to give it a name. So now again we'll give it a meaningful name, so we'll call it customer info, and then click OK. There might be times where you might want to modify this existing query. So what you'll do is, of course, you can run it and see what it does, but you can also go here to the home tab. There are a couple ways to do this. So once you select the query, you can right click on it and choose design view. Under design view, this is where you can add more fields or delete more fields like we did before. So the concept that I'm trying to show you here is that how can you go back and modify a query? Again, it is by right-clicking, choosing design, and then you can add more fields and delete other fields. So let's say right here I wanted to add, for example, the street address, city, state, zip. I'm double-clicking on them. Now notice it actually added them farther down in our area here. So what you can do is select what you want, select those fields, and then drag them farther to wherever you want them. So notice I just was able to move the order of them. So now if I rerun it, notice I have the first name, last name, their address, city, state, zip, and so on. Then if we are happy with the design of the new query here, we close it, and then we click on to save the changes for the design. Again, in Microsoft Access, we just save changes for the design. The data is automatically saved as soon as you complete entering one specific cell or the data into one of the cells. So in the next session, I'm going to show you how you can actually add criteria to the queries. In this session, I'm going to talk about item number 3 here, sorting data via a query, and then also we're going to apply some criteria to those queries in an Access database. So let's go back here to Access, and let's say I have a query, as we talked about this also in the previous video. So we have a query that we designed from earlier, and this query has these specific fields. It has the first name, last name, street address, city, state, and zip, and telephone and email. Those fields are from the customers table, but then we were able to also go and get the contract amount and the date when the contract was signed and the contract type. All this data, we got it from the contracts table. So notice we are pulling data from two tables here. And by now you should know why we are able to pull data from two tables. Let's go ahead and modify this query. So what we can do is we can click here under View on the drop down and choose Design View. Or the easiest, and this is a better way of doing it probably, is to right click on the item and then choose what you want to do. So in this case, I want to choose the design view. So I click on design view. And now we are going to change a couple things here. Let's say we wanted to order the customers or that list, that query, we wanted to order it by last name. So all you have to do is to sort it. All you have to do is you click on the drop down here under the sort row. And let's say we want ascending order by last name. If I click on run, notice that all the customers will be ordered automatically by last name. Now let's say I changed my mind and I want to order them by first name. So what you do is you go under the view here or design view, or right click and choose design view again, and then change it so you order by first name in ascending order, and then take the order out for this field. There are ways to order by two or more fields here as well, and keep in mind that the first column here takes precedence. So it's going to order by this first and then the other one and so on. Let's go ahead and run this. And notice now we have all the A's and so on reordered. That's how the ordering goes. Now let's go ahead and specify some criteria to our queries. So let's say we wanted to see only the customers that are within a zip code. Notice before we were talking about separating in one of the previous videos, I was talking about when you enter the data into a table, make sure that you select or you enter individual pieces of that data in separate fields. For example, not the whole address in one field. You separate the cities, state, zip, and so on, so that you can actually sort it later, sort the customers later. So notice, let's say we want to see all the customers that are living in the city of Holland, for example. So what you do is you right click on the query here and then choose design view. And then under city, notice right here where it says criteria, we just type the word Holland. And then we run this query. Notice it gave us all the other fields along with just the customers that are in the city Holland. Let's say we are not interested in the field here for telephone number and all that type of stuff. If we don't want that to show up, what we do is we go back to the design view. We could either delete the field completely, for example, for the back here, the telephone and email, or we can uncheck it, and this check means that it's going to show or not show that field in the datasheet view when we run this query. So that's how you hide and show the different fields. So if I click on show, notice at this point the telephone number will not display anymore. Now what about if we wanted to go back to our query, and if you remember from earlier, we had customers from other cities as well. We had, let me display all of them. So if I take this criteria out, rerun it, notice we have customers from Holland here and also from the city of Lansing and other ones as well. So let's say I wanted to display only the customers from Holland or Lansing. So what you do is you go back to the design view, and then right here under the city, we add criteria Holland. And then down here, we type also Lansing. And then run the query. And notice at this point, we have the customers displayed from just these two cities. So this is a type of criteria, filtering it by two items within the same field. Now here's another thing that you can do here. Notice that these by city here, they are not ordered together in a certain order, like by Holland first and then Lansing next and so on. To change that or to fix that, what you do is you right click, you go under design view, and this is what we learned earlier. And let's say we want to order this in ascending order by city. So we rerun this, and notice now we have all the, actually we don't have them ordered correctly at this point, because if we go back to the design view, notice if you scroll to the left, we are sorting this stuff also by the first field. So that's why I was saying earlier that the first left-hand side field takes precedence. So if I take that out, the sorting by first name, now notice these will be sorted correctly by city. So we have all the Holland customers and then all the Lansing customers. Now you could go and modify this even further. So let's say I wanted to get customers from Holland and Lansing, but with incomes or contract amounts more than 5,000 or more. So notice we have some here with less than 5,000. So the way you change that with adding a third criteria to this query is by going back here, and then we have those two criteria right here, Holland and Lansing, and then we are going to add a third one, and the third criteria, it's going to be by amount. So if we go under contract amount, and then we add here, notice criteria on this same row in the right spot here, we add greater equal 5,000, and then run this. Notice it's going to display only the customers with greater or equal to 5,000. Actually, we have here one with 300. And the reason for that is because we are telling the system, notice the reason why it's giving us the 300 is because we have asked the system to show or Lansing. So it's got to be a criteria of Holland and greater than 5,000 or Lansing. So we could either take out Lansing here or add also for, so we'd have to add either the second criteria here under or, which is not very common, or just take Lansing out and then adjust the criteria just so we see the results. So at this point we have the criteria is City Holland and then all greater than 5,000. If I run it, notice it will have the right numbers. If I go back under design view and add Lansing, then I need to probably put here greater than 5,000 for Lansing as well, and then run it, and then it will give me only the numbers greater than 5,000. So that's how you run it with multiple criteria. Now this is limitless basically. You can have any type of combination here. You can have other types of fields from these tables. You can add even more than two tables if they are linked together correctly. Just keep in mind that queries are pretty much almost limitless depending on how many fields you have and how many combinations of those fields that you want to put together. In this session, I'm going to show you how you can run a criteria from multiple tables. In this case, 3 tables. We have the contacts table, the customers table, and the invoices table. They are all linked together. And I want to pull, let's say, the first name, last name. Those are from the customers table. Then the contract number, and that will be under contracts. And then the invoice date, invoice item, invoice amount, and whether it was paid or not, it is from the invoices table. Now, how we can pull a criteria like this, how we can run a criteria like this, and then also do some more things with this, whether the invoice was paid or not, and even create a calculated field so that if the customer did not pay this invoice, you charge them a late fee for it. So let's go ahead and design the query. So I'm going to close this and not save the changes here. So here's how you create the query from the 3 tables. We know that the tables are linked. Now we go under the query design here, and then we add the tables. So the first table, we can add the tables in any order, really doesn't matter. So I'll add the first one, go to the second, and then the third table. Then we click on close. Now let's say that the first field that we want in the query is the first name. Then we choose the last name, so I could double click on it. And then let's say I want the contact number for whatever reason, as a reference, I guess. And then we can choose here the invoice date, the item on the invoice, the amount, and then finally if it was paid or not. By the way, you can make these bigger by just dragging it down. Then double click on paid or not, and then we can go ahead and run and see what this looks like. Click on run, and notice we have pretty much what we had before. So we have first name, last name, number, date, item, and then the amount and whether it was paid or not. Now, of course, we could go and arrange this in order, for example, whether it was paid or not. And then we'll go here under design view, either by right clicking on it or just view here, and then design view. And then we need to scroll to move this actually up. And then we can go ahead and order this in ascending order. Now, if I run it, notice they are not in order. Now, most likely they are not in order because we have another field that is doing the ordering. Actually, we chose the amount here, so let's go back, and we wanted whether it was paid or not. So we choose ascending, run it, and now notice we have all the no's. Now, what about if we wanted to display only the customers that have not paid? Because these are the ones that we want to notify, and eventually we want to even send them a letter, tell them that there is a penalty or a late fee for the payment, that the invoice was not paid. So first, let's learn how we can actually limit only those that have not paid. So if we go back here under view and then choose design view, we can go here whether it was paid or no. Now remember from before, when we chose the customer city, we entered for example Lansing or Holland. Now, in this case, we have a yes or no. So the invoice was either paid yes or not paid no. So if before we entered the city name Lansing or Holland to limit it by, in this case, if we wanted those that have not paid, that criteria would be here. What we'd put in here would be just simply the word no, because we want to display these fields with customers that have a criteria of the invoice not paid or with a status of no. So now we run this, and notice we have here just those customers. If I scroll down, there are no customers that have a paid invoice. Now, what about in this list, we do not even want to see the word no here or these fields no, but we want to display only the customers that have not paid their invoices. What you can do, again, we can hide this field. And if you remember earlier, we could go here under design view. And by the way, I'm not right clicking on it because we have not saved this query yet. So if I go ahead and choose to save this, so invoices, we give it a name. Now we can right click on it and choose design view. So that's why I was not clicking on design view there. If I don't want to see the field no, I can just uncheck it here. It's still going to run it on that criteria, but it's just not going to display it. So notice we don't have that field. You'd say, well, why do I want this list? This would come in very handy for customers that have late payments. And usually, as most companies do nowadays, those that have not paid their 30,000 bill or more or less here, you want to charge them a percentage fee. So now in the next section here, we are going to learn how to calculate or to add another field here that would calculate the late fee. So here's how that is done. So we go into design view, right click design view, or view and then design view on the top. And then we're going to add a new field over here. So to add a new field, what you'll need to do is you need to click on this builder icon here on the top. And then on here, what we are going to do is the amount. So the invoice amount, double click on it. And then times is the asterisk. Let's say we are going to charge 5%, 0.05. And then we click OK. Now notice it says here EXPR, and it has all kinds of other stuff behind it. What we do here is we can type there, just leave everything alone, and right here where it's EXPR1, just that section, we want to change that to late fee and leave the rest alone. So if we go to the right here, notice it's doing the late fee, it's calculated the amount times 0.05. So then if we run this query, notice we just created another column that we added. So for this customer that has a $30,000 bill, the 5% comes to $1,500. So now the question would be, how can we format this? And by the way, that is how you create a calculated field in Microsoft Access. And you can look this part again in the video, just rewind it and see it again how it was done. So now we are going to learn how we can add here the dollar amount, or make or format this field as a currency field. So we'll go back here under the query design and go into design view. And then what you do is there is a property sheet over here, an icon on the top right. Click on it. Go to the field that we want to modify the formatting for it, and notice it's giving us the properties for the late fee field or for the invoice paid field. Now notice for these other ones, like let's go to the amount here. The amount was formatted earlier in the table into the dollar amount. So now we are going to go here into the late fee, and we're going to format this, click on the drop down, and we're going to format that into currency, to the dollar amount. And then the decimal places, you can specify those as well. So you can mark it at 2 decimal points. So now we can close this, the property sheet, rerun the query, and notice the late fee has been formatted as currency. At this point, we could save this query. We could actually even click on save up here, and that has been saved at this point because we had not saved it yet earlier. And if I close it, notice it doesn't ask us to save it again. Now, if I go here under and run this query quickly, notice I have all these late fees. What about if I wanted to get the total here on the very top for these late fees? And this is what we're going to learn next, getting the total for different fields. So let's go ahead and run this query again. Notice we have these late fees here. And now let's say that we wanted to see the totals in this query. So in the very bottom here, we want the total. So what you do is you click on it and then go to the Home tab. And then there is this option here for totals. So we click on it, and then it's going to give us one more row in the very end for us to specify what totals we want. So let's say for the late fees, we want the sum here. And then also for the invoices, we click on the drop down and we want the sum of those invoices. So then we save it. And whenever we rerun it and those numbers change, those will be updated automatically. So if I go here under contracts and I modify, notice that this was the total here ended with 850, 1.3 million and 850. Actually, I needed to modify the invoices because that's where the invoices are pulled from. So the amount here, for example, it says 70,000. I go and change that to $1. As soon as I update this invoices amount, because again, the query was running from the invoices before, close this, run the query again, notice that has been changed. So now it's $1,398,851 compared to what it was before. So those are some of the queries. That's limitless to what you can do and how you can run those queries. I would say play with them, but this is the general idea of creating new fields, calculated fields. And by the way, you can go ahead and change the design here. And let's say that you want to charge them 7% late fee. You'll notice that from 65,000, it's going to change when you modify that. So if we go back here to our design and we go to our calculation, so instead of 0.5, we make it 0.7%, and then run the query again. Notice that from 65,000, now we have 91,000 in late fees. So check those out, and it's a lot of fun actually playing with the queries and generating all these types of data. In previous videos, we have talked about different components of a database that we have tables, queries, then we have forms and reports. In this session, I'm going to particularly focus on forms. Forms are very similar to the function of input in a computer, and forms are utilized to primarily enter and view records in a database. So your assistant in your office would actually be utilizing the forms for looking up records and modifying content of those records and also entering new ones. It's not recommended that the data be entered directly into the tables. It's usually done through the forms. So the question is, how do we create a form? So the forms can be created either based on a table, and you can have more than one form per table or multiple tables. And you can customize those forms as long as the tables are linked together as well, if you are utilizing data from multiple tables. So let's create a form here for just the customers first. To do that, we can utilize the form wizard. So we click on form wizard, and then let's say under customers, we want customer ID, company, first name, last name, and basically all the fields. The reason why you might want all of them is because you might want to update all the information about a particular customer. However, if you don't want your assistant to modify certain fields, then you can create a form with just the fields to modify. So now we click on next, and then we click on next again, and then just give it a name. Then we click on finish, and this is the form at this point. Notice you can move from customer to customer. By the way, let's close it first. And here it is, customer simple. So that's the current form. You can navigate from customer to customer. You can also filter or search by a specific name. So let's say I click on first name here and I type Sally. Notice it will pull up the record for this specific name. And you can create new records by clicking on this last icon here. You can make certain fields required in a form or in a database or table, but for now we're not going to mess with them because we're just learning basic concepts. So now once that has been entered, if we go back here on customer 42, that has been updated, that record has been updated. Now how do we make this form a little bit nicer? So what you can do here is that you can click on the Home tab, and under the Home tab you can click on View, and then you can change it to the layout view. The layout view allows you to modify those specific fields and basically format that form to what you may like or what you may want. There are also predefined themes that you can pick and choose here, and it will change the color theme. You can change the fonts and other components as well, and you can also add new fields. However, it is not recommended that you add new fields directly from the form. The design needs to happen usually in the tables. That's why when you're designing a database, you would think and look at all the different angles as to how your table is going to be designed, what fields are needing to be included, and so on, because it makes it so much simpler to create the forms, to create the queries after you have a good structural design of your tables. And of course, you can resize those fields if you needed to. As far as the formatting, you can change the formatting here. You can add a logo. You can change the title of it, change it. It says customer simple, change it to something else, and so on. So it can be modified quite a bit. You can also move those fields around so that you make the form look as nice as you want it. So it's a matter of drag and drop here. There is also the design view here. If you click on the drop down and choose design view, that is where you can kind of tinker more and adjust those fields more precisely in different new locations and so on. And notice you can drag the whole data here. So if I go ahead and close this, save it, then open it up again, notice it has been adjusted. Of course, it doesn't look great at this point, but you can modify it so that it looks better than this. Again, the trick here is going under Home, choosing View, and then going between those different views. Now, this is a simple form. This is just for one table. Now, if the tables are linked, just like in queries, you can also create a compound form. So the form here, what you utilize is you'd again choose the wizard for the forms. So let's say we want the customers. We want customer ID, company, first name, last name, telephone, street address, and so on. Then we want, let's say, the contacts table. We want, let's say, the amount, actually the date and type. If you remember, when we linked the tables together, those tables had a one-to-many relationship. That means that one customer with multiple contracts. So in this case, when we click on next here, notice that we can arrange this by customer. So let's say you have Hubert Sims, and then he would have all his contracts under him, and not the other way around, even though you can modify it to look like that. But the design of the table is so that you have one customer with multiple contracts, or one student with multiple courses that they have taken. So we'll click on next here. So basically it's going to look something like this: customer, and then the amounts and contract amount here. Click on next, next again, and then we give it a name. And then click on finish. At this point, notice we have the customers, their email address, and so on. And then right below, we also have the contracts for that specific customer. So if we switch from one customer to the other, notice it's going to change their contracts, or it's going to list the contracts that those specific customers have. So now you could either add a new customer, or you could just add a new contract for this specific customer. For example, for a mall, or however you say the name here, you would add a new contract, let's say 70,000. So one thing to remember here when you're dealing with these designs of the new forms and so on is to make sure you close the form at one point and then reopen it so that it saves the design before you go and add any new contracts. This is one of the things that will probably confuse you if you forget to remember to do that part of it. So now let's say, for example, for a mall here, we want to add a new contract. So the contract, let's say it would be the contract number 4543. And that's the customer number. So the customer number, it's basically going to match the customer number up here, 11014. So that's why it's pre-populating it. And then let's say we add a new contract at $7,000. And then you can put the date in there, and then what type of contract it is. And then move on to the next customer, basically. So this has been registered at this point, and it's all good to go. So that's how you'd use the forms to add. So it's basically the idea here is that you use the forms to add data, retrieve data from different customers, and update their records. And at this point, if you were to go back to those queries that we discussed earlier, you would be able to see those contracts reflected. So for example, customers with contracts, if you were to search for a mall, notice there is a 7,000 and landscaping that we created earlier. So that's forms. We'll have reports in the next session. As I've mentioned in prior videos, there are primarily four basic components in a database. They are the tables, the queries, the forms, and the reports. In this session, I'm going to focus a little bit on the reports. So how you create a report and how you modify those reports. We have three tables here and a bunch of queries. You can run a report either on the tables themselves, multiple tables if they are linked together, or you can run the reports based on different queries. So let's try first running a query, running a report from a table. So you go under Create, and then you choose the report wizard. That'll be the easiest. And then you pick here, let's say customers. Let's say I want a list of customers by first name, last name, street address, city, state, zip. Let's say I wanted to do a mail merge for these. And of course, if you wanted to do an email merge, you could utilize the email field as well. So I click on Next, and then Next again. And then you can order those customers by first name, last name, or however you want them in a different order. And then just choose how you want those fields laid out. So just customers, I'll name it for now. Then I'll click on Finish. And notice the customers have been listed, and it looks a little bit nicer because you should be able to print this out. It's designed to be printed out. So think of the forms as the output in a computer, but in this case it's in databases, so you have the reports. So now if you wanted to modify this form, I'll show this to you actually in a moment, once I create a report that actually links to more than one table. So if I'll close this other thing as well. Now let's go back and create another report. We go under Report Wizard, we go under, let's say, Customers. Again, it's the same idea that we have been doing here with queries as well. Same thing. And let's say we wanted first name, last name, and then we go under Contracts, and let's say we want the contact number, amount, date, and type. Let's say we want Next, and let's say we want to order this by customers. Click on Next. It's very similar to the form that we saw earlier. And then we are going to order this. You could order it in any order of priority here. Click on Next. Let's say we want it by contract amount. And you could even post on the report, let's say the total for the contracts. Then we click OK. Next. So basically play with the settings here, what you see on the screen. Next, and let's say give it a name to the report. Then we click on Finish. Now notice we have here the report with some summaries and a bunch of numbers. And so now notice it doesn't look too great because I should probably have picked the landscape formatting. So to change the formatting here, you can click on Landscape under Page Layout, and let's take a look again, and it still does not look that great. Now the next thing that you can do here to improve the looks and the feel of this is to go under Close the Preview screen here, and then what you do is you go either under the Layout view or the Design view. So that's the report view. You go down under View here, choose Layout. That'll change the layout. We can tinker with the layout a little bit. So notice now we have to adjust these columns. And whenever you see those number signs, that means that the field here, it's not long enough. So you can modify this to how you want, basically. Notice we can go here and make this much wider. You can go ahead and change the formatting of these here to be a different theme. And then you can also, if you go here under View and choose Design View, you can also choose to modify those even further. Under Properties. Notice we want it, let's say, transparent. And here we're kind of getting into more complicated stuff. Just keep in mind that you can go to the different views and customize different components at this point. So now we click on view the report. Notice it doesn't have those lines and it's a little cleaner than before. If you don't want a certain field, if you go back to the layout view and you don't want a certain component here, just delete it and it will clean it out. If you want, let's say, the sum field to be showing up somewhere else, just drag it and it will show up. If you want to change the name, you can do that as well. Format those, go under the home, click on that, click on the color, and notice now the report has been modified. So that's how you modify the report, how you create a report from the fields from different tables. And of course you could make this look a lot nicer than we did in this section so far. Now, one last thing I'll show you regarding reports here is that you can actually create reports based on queries. If you remember earlier, we had customers that have not paid their invoices yet, and that also that they have a late fee. Let's say the boss wants to see a nice report of this. Of course, you could print this out and so on, but what you can do is, it's the nicer thing to do is, it will be to create a report based on this query. So what we'll do, we click on create, then go under report wizard, and then we choose the query invoice paid no. That's the query that we had clicked last. By the way, that's the trick if you want that to show up first. Now we want to add, let's say, all the fields here. Then we click on next. Then it's going to order them by, let's say, customers. Next, next, and so on. You could modify this further if you wanted. And then name it. And here is our report. So basically what it did is that it took each customer. It shows us the contract number first, and then the invoices for each contract and so on. For example, for Ann Kim, we have this contract and this one has 2 invoices. Notice these numbers, again, like we learned earlier, you can go ahead and tinker with them. Click on close the preview, go under view, change the layout, and make these fields a little longer or nicer so you can actually read the content. It's a matter of playing with it at this point and adjusting those numbers and the widths of the columns. So that's how the reports work, and again, keep in mind it's to output the data in a nice format. There's a lot that can be done with Microsoft Access, and what we have covered in the previous videos is just scratching the surface. For those of you that have not watched the previous videos, I'd recommend that you go and check them out. At this point, I'm going to show a couple more things here. One of them is exporting data into Microsoft Excel. So if we go here under external data, we can go ahead and actually send something. So let's say we have this invoices paid, yes or no. Notice it has this data. You can actually choose to send it to Excel or to a text file or email and so on. You can also right click on this stuff and then choose export and then choose Excel. So either way will work. So if I choose the first method here, select the query, click on Excel, then it's going to save it to a specific location. And you can even choose to preserve the layout. Let's say we want to preserve that. And then we'll open the destination file when it's completed. Now we'll just click OK and the process is complete. So now in Excel, what you could do is you could take this data and sort it out and adjust it and work with it any way you want, like you used Excel before. Create charts and things of that nature. So that's one of the options. Another option is to create a mail merge from a query or a table that you have in Microsoft Access. There are a couple ways of creating the mail merge. You can either go into Word first and then link to the database and then run the mail merge from there. So that's one of the ways. The second way, and it's a little bit easier actually, is to go into Access, select what table you or what query you want to utilize. For example, I want here the invoice is paid, yes or no. And to make things a little bit easier here, I could actually go and add the addresses if I wanted to. So if I wanted to choose design view and I want to go and add the addresses, I could. If I was going to actually send an actual mail, letter basically. So if we go here to the right, they'll be in the very end, and it doesn't matter the order at this point. So let's say I'm happy with it, save this. If I run it, it will also have the addresses. So now let's go ahead and create a mail merge from this one. So we have this query, and we go under external data, and then we choose to export this data into a mail merge, because you remember this was to import before the beginning of Microsoft Access, what we did. And then here we are going to choose a mail merge. Double click on it. It asks us, do we want to link it to an existing Word document? That means that if we have an existing document, a form letter, like a letter that we are writing to our customers and so on, we could utilize an existing one, or we could go and create a new one from scratch. So we're going to use the second option here. We'll click on OK, and then it opens Microsoft Word. At this point, it's just asking us, it's kind of simplifying the process. The linking has been done. It's asking us whether we want letters or email messages or labels, or what do we want. So I'll choose letters. Then I'll click on Start the document. Then I'll tell the system that I'm going to use the current document even though it's blank. Then we'll choose the next step, select the recipients. The recipients are already selected. It's kind of linked to Microsoft Access because we started the process from Microsoft Access, and kind of that part is complete. Usually you'd have to pick it if you started from Microsoft Word. So for now we are all set with the current list here. Notice invoice is paid, no. That's the query in Access. Then we click on Write Your Letter. Then at this point it's asking us basically to insert the fields. So if I wanted to insert the fields, I could go ahead here under Insert Mail Merge Field, and let's say I want the first name, space, last name. Then I want the address. Notice it doesn't matter the order. And then I want the city, comma, state, and then zip. And we could say dear, and then put the first name of the customer. And you could have, let's say, the amount here, and we want to put a $sign in front of it so it formats it correctly. And let's say we want the late fee posted as well. And then you could put the invoice number. We actually don't have that listed here, but we could choose contract number for now. Now at this point, with your company logo, you could format this and make it nicer, a different font and so on, and adjust it the way you want it. You could preview your letters and they're going to look similar to this. If you wanted to format this nicer, notice I forgot to put the dollar amount there, or the $sign. You could do that. And if you're ready to, you could exclude certain recipients, and then you could complete the mail merge. So click on the next step, complete it. You could print them out or edit the individual letters. I recommend that you choose edit to just look at them first. And now notice this is how it's going to look. So that's how you create a mail merge from Access using Microsoft Word. And one more final thing before we finish here with Microsoft Access. Let's go back. In Microsoft Access, from time to time, it's worthwhile that you'd actually do compact and repair the database. What that means is that it goes and checks it and verifies the data and so on. The other thing that you need to do is that you need to make a copy of the database so that you have a backup of it, because if you are collecting so much data and you are also spending so much time on it, you want to have good backups of the database. So basically you need to have multiple copies of it. It's important also to understand that when using a Microsoft Access database, you can have multiple users use the same file, update, modify, and view the data from the same file, unlike Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel. So that's it on Microsoft Access. Hopefully it was beneficial. Feel free to refer to the other video tutorials on learning these different features that we have covered.